is our military way behind other countries in terms of using the latest technology with AI, with drones, with biotech, with cybersecurity? I think for many years it was. We're behind. We know we're behind on supersonic weapons. Are we behind on AI? How did Hamas send undetected 1,000 or so paragliders into Israel without Israel detecting it? Are we behind on, the AI that's in sensors? Like, what is going on? So with the help of Chris Kirchhoff, who wrote Unit X, How the Pentagon and Silicon Valley Are Transforming the Future of War, we answer these questions and more.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show.
Let me start off by asking, where is the U.S. failing now? I feel like other countries are moving past us in a lot of ways with modern technology. Like we recently heard that on hypersonics, the ability to send missiles, at speeds of like Mach 10 is surpassing the U.S.'s ability to do it. On AI, we know places like China have no ethical qualms about pursuing the most, aggressive forms of AI in order to create better weapons. Like, does the U.S. have a chance in this new technological regime we're in?
It sure does, but it is, I agree with you totally. It's counterintuitive. Like, how have we gotten to this place where all of a sudden other nations are beating us at our own game, like in a lot of dimensions, not only, as you mentioned, with leading edge emerging technology like artificial intelligence, but also potentially on the battlefield, which is shocking, right? Because, ever since the end of the Second World War, the United States has had sort of unquestioned conventional military superiority. But there are some reasons that have led us to this sort of astonishing juncture. And there are, I think, some emerging answers about what to do about it.
And yeah, and it's interesting you use conventional warfare. So like when I think of the military race, the weapons race, we think of nuclear weapons, like, oh, who has better and more nuclear weapons? And then it's just a sheer numbers game, like who has more planes and ships? And I guess in terms of planes, who has faster planes? And none of these things turn out to be important in terms of winning a war. Like, who has more nuclear weapons doesn't make a difference in terms of who will win the war. And who has faster planes? It turns out, we made all these faster than the speed of sound planes, like the F4s, the F-104s. It doesn't really. Those aren't the planes that get into dogfights because now there's smart missiles guided, there's drones and so on. So it's not like these. We don't make fast planes now. Like the U.S. doesn't make Phantoms or other faster than sound planes because it's not necessary. So all of these things that were kind of measures of military superiority with conventional warfare are useless metrics now.
Well, it really is true. Just the other day I was in a room and there was a U.S. senator griping about the fact that the number of ships the Navy fields had gone down. And of course, that's sort of like measuring your military effectiveness by how many cavalry horses you have in the barn. It's just not a relevant measure. But it is important to step back in time and to realize that, just like anything, the technology that drives military superiority ebbs and flows. And so at one time, the cavalry were the dominant force of war. And then around World War I, you got mechanized tanks, right, that clearly proved superior. And World War I was a war fought by battleships, but World War II is a war won by aircraft carriers. So that's another incredible transformation. And so I think that the thing to think about now, like, why is it that our military is no longer as dominant as it once was? For a very long time, that's starting probably with the end of the Cold War, the first Gulf War. Dropping bombs down, chimneys, right? The U.S. had grown up this, it's known as a precision strike complex that was just astonishing. But that was, in the early 1990s. And our adversaries have now had more than 30 years to study how we are successful and to purpose build their militaries around ways to be able to defeat our strengths. So that's part of the reason why we're arriving at this moment where all of a sudden our margins on the battlefield have eroded substantially.
Yeah, and I mean, well, there's a couple things you mentioned in the book that I want to bring up, but let's actually talk about a recent example. Which, how did the Hamas send over whatever it was, 1,700 paragliders into Israel without Israel knowing? Like Israel's got, if anybody's going to be ahead of us in technology, it's probably going to be Israel. And yet somehow or other, their entire security complex was down. All these paragliders came in and just raped and pillaged for the whole day and started this devastating war that's still going on. How did that happen? How did we not notice with our satellites? Israel not notice with all of their sensors? Like just a basic technology thing seems to have gone wrong.
I got a chance to visit Israel the first week in June and Gaza as well. And I mean, first of all, it's just such a tragedy because what happened on October 7th has kicked off a cycle of violence that's just only spinning out wider and that, has engulfed not only Israel and Hamas, but now some of the wider Middle East and
Iran, Lebanon,
it's a
Yemen.
really tragic situation. Moving away from a viable peace process rather than towards it. And so, that does make you look at the day, what happened on October 7th as even more tragic. And, it goes to show that people that don't like each other will come up with ingenious ways to harm the other side. And on October 7th, it started by Hamas using quadcopters, commercial quadcopters. They had literally bought off Amazon.
So
drones, cheap drones, not military grade drones, like drones that you and I would use to like film ourselves skateboarding or skiing. And they mounted grenades to those drones and they dropped them on the generators powering the surveillance towers that looked over the border wall separating Gaza from Israel. So that's how the attack started. And then there were other tactical things they did that were quite unique, like, for instance, using paragliders to drop small amounts of infantry troops across the line. So
when they blew up, though, these the sensors on the surveillance towers using these drones, yes, it was basic technology, but doesn't Israel have technology to, hey, our surveillance software just went down?
Well, they were pretty crafty. So, as I understand it, they essentially took out all the surveillance towers at once. So, like that Mission Impossible movie where all the security, television all go blank at the same time. And, Israel, not, going back to the Maginot Line, right? This, fortification built to essentially prevent, the attack that happened in World War I from being successful. And of course, the Germans just drove right around it rather than going through it. And that sophisticated fortification then, 3 generations ago, had fostered what turned out to be a very false degree of confidence that, we're using advanced technology to protect it. There's no way for this advanced technology to be defeated. And of course, that hubris led the Israeli military not to have troops in reserve and, not to take a lot of basic steps that most militaries in that situation would have taken guarding a hostile border.
So okay, so this is one example, but now let's take the U.S. Even despite all the work you've put in and is described in the book Unit X, where is the U.S. still lagging, or where are you worried the U.S. is still lagging on technology? Should that tensions result with China or North Korea? Like in the book, you mentioned how you even thought we had round the clock satellite surveillance of North Korea so we could see what they're doing. And who would think North Korea is technologically savvy? But the reality is we can't really see them with satellites. They're covered by clouds 200 days a year and basic technology we haven't to get past that we haven't incorporated into the US military.
Well, I mean, we all wish that it worked like it did in the movies, right? Like Mission Impossible and James Bond, where there's a super secret satellite that nobody knows about that swoops in to save the day. But of course, it doesn't work like that. And there has been a real shift. So, in the book Unit X, we begin the story in 2016, and if you had gone up to any four-star general in the U.S. military and said, "I would bet you a steak dinner that in 10 years drones are going to be able to defeat tanks," they would say, "You're on." I'll bet you 10 steak dinners. And of course, they would have turned out to be wrong because here we are in Ukraine, seeing drones, demonstrably destroy armored vehicles. And not only that, but just a few weeks ago, the Ukrainians had to withdraw from the front lines all 31 of the M1A1 Abrams battle tanks that the U.S. had given the Ukrainian military because more than a quarter of them had been destroyed by Russian kamikaze drones. I mean, this is the most advanced tank in the U.S. arsenal, in the arsenal of our adversaries. So I guess what I worry about now is, no four-star general would take that bet today that a drone can't defeat an armored vehicle or a tank. But if our most advanced...
How do they defeat a tank, by the way? How does a drone defeat a tank?
Well, it turns out that tanks are built essentially to fight other tanks and artillery. So they're armored to take strikes, in particular from the sides, but some of their top side parts are quite vulnerable. And if you can get a smaller charge up close, you might not leave the tank as a sort of smoking hole in the ground, but you'll disable it from being an effective fighting vehicle. So, here again, inexpensive, drones, we're talking, $1,000 or $2 of hardware plus, $20 worth of high explosives, taking out a tank that, is a multi-million-dollar armored vehicle. And so, that leads me to ask the question, are we at one of those moments, right, where, in the First World War, the cavalry clearly met its demise, with the rise of the tank. But, could we be similarly today at the end of a century of mechanized warfare, of man-mechanized warfare, and shifting into a new paradigm? And if that's the case, then and this is where we arrive at this paradox of how is it that the U.S. military got into a very different place. We've made a heck of an investment in tanks. We have a lot of them. Our allies have a lot of them. We have planes and ships that are designed to ferry tanks around the world to wherever they need to go. But if they arrive and they're not a viable weapon on the battlefield, then we've made a massive investment in something that doesn't any longer have the combat firepower it did just a few years ago.
So let's say you were starting from scratch and you could outfit the military with any technology you want and ramp up whatever you want for these situations. What would you do right now?
Well, some smart people in the Pentagon, I think, have some great ideas already about what direction to head. And they've just started about half a year ago or so, something called the Replicator Initiative, which is an initiative to build low-cost autonomous weapon systems. So instead of building, fighter jets, like on the cover of our book, we have the F-35. And, that's, a $300 million piece of equipment. You start with inexpensive but still fairly capable weapon systems and use mass, in other words, numbers, to make up for perhaps a smaller number of weapons platforms that cost a lot more and get you just a little bit more capability, but in the end could be overwhelmed by mass. And so there is a directional shift in the Pentagon now to embracing, a much more autonomous, distributed, driven by AI set of weapon systems. But this comes along with a big debate. That's not only a debate in the E-Ring of the Pentagon, where all the four stars have their offices along with the Secretary of Defense. It's also a debate in Congress because it's one thing to have a consensus that, yeah, we should try out these new weapon systems, but it's another thing to say we should probably stop buying tanks. We should probably shut down the tank plants, and all the manufacturers in, God knows how many states that produce them. Am I right? There's a whole complex here. There's a political story. There have to be members of Congress that are willing to say, it's going to be really hard for my community to give up this plant that we've, had for 2 generations cranking out tanks. Um, uh, but I'm going to take a vote to do that, to, take a bet on the future of war. That's hard.
Yeah. So what will happen?
Well, we'll find out, right? I mean, this part of the story is not yet told. Um, but as excited as I am as all of the things that Defense Innovation Unit has accomplished, particularly in shifting thinking. DIU now has a mission that Congress has actually codified in law. Congress this year appropriated the budget of Defense Innovation Unit to be $1 billion, which is, that's real money, right?
Take a quick break. If you like this episode, I'd really, really appreciate it. It means so much to me. Please share it with your friends and subscribe to the podcast. Email me at altucher@gmail.com and tell me why you subscribed. Thanks. And so let's describe that. So this unit you started with your partner Raj Shah, started in 2016. You got $30 million in funds to start off with, roughly. I mean, it was a battle. Like everything with government, there was a bureaucratic battle once you even got the approval, and the job was to basically bridge this gap between Silicon Valley, which was working on all this amazing technology, and the military, which had nothing. What were some of the first successes of this? Like, how did you sort of prove out that this was a good idea?
Well, first of all, the military had a whole lot of stuff, and it was pretty amazing stuff, right? So going back to the F-35, the fighter that's on the cover of our book, Unit X. This is it's a flying supercomputer is stealthy, right? It has super advanced weapons. It can strike targets, well over the horizon. It's supersonic. It's an amazing piece of hardware, right? It will take down any other plane in the sky with a comfortable margin of error. But the way it is produced is through a very bespoke kind of production, right? That the U.S. grew up in the Cold War and that still exists today, such that the design of the F-35, the most advanced aircraft in the world, was finalized in 2001. And it didn't become fully operational until 2016, 15 years later. And of course, a lot in technology had changed in those 15 years. So the whole purpose behind Defense Innovation Unit and having the Pentagon become a part of Silicon Valley and begin to access the consumer technology ecosystem is that consumer technology ecosystem, which is really separate. We have sort of two systems of production for technology here in the United States, one for the military and one for everything else. And that other system is faster. It operates under much fewer rules. It's much more free market. You can do things typically for much lower costs. It's much more agile. And the whole goal of the office was to bring these two systems closer together.
It's interesting because it reminds me of both the post office and the arguments about the 200-year-old argument about communism versus capitalism. Is that basically, and I'm not trying to take one side, I guess I am taking a side here, which is that when you have government planning things, it doesn't work as well as when kind of the private markets, create things and plan things. Like central planning doesn't work. So if the government says, oh, we're going to need all these fighter jets 15 years from now, that doesn't work as well as just kind of a bunch of venture capitalists getting together, funding something, and then seeing what the market produces and delivers.
Well, yes, of course. But the story is more complex because these two different technology ecosystems do fit together in very meaningful ways. And so if you grab the iPhone from your pocket, about 80% of the technology in that iPhone wasn't developed by Apple. It was developed by DARPA and other federal labs in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. Even Siri started off as a DARPA research project. So there is a synergy between these two systems. So that's important to know. The second thing that's important to know is that this defense system of production that has strengths and weaknesses is purpose built for a reason. You can't really have a free market per se for aircraft carrier builders, right? You can't go on Amazon and like comparison shop. It turns out there's like one, maybe two companies in the world that can build you an aircraft carrier. So what that means is you're not in a free market. You're in a system that economists refer to as monopsony, where there is one buyer and just a couple sellers. So the market won't set prices. You have to set prices in a different way, in a way that involves cost accounting and auditing procedures that make sure the taxpayer dollars are being used fairly in building this incredibly complex technology that takes years to assemble, and by the way, might be around for 30, 40, 50 years, right? The lifetime of some of these platforms is quite impressive. And so that system, as you have to imagine, has to run under a lot of rules and regulations and requirements that specify exactly how things should be built in advance, not knowing how technology is going to change. And then there's an army of auditors, and each defense contractor has to have an accounting system that will plug into the Pentagon's auditing system. So, in effect, that creates a system not unlike a public utility, where we all have to have electricity, right? You can't let the free market decide that we're only going to give electricity to people in cities because there's a density of profit there that would motivate private capital to, put up electricity wires. So these two systems, they do exist, understandably, in very different ways. What happens in the military-industrial complex isn't, by itself crazy or without logic. It's just that we're moving into a world where that other technology ecosystem that moves much faster is now gone global. I mean, the world is flat in the sense that the microelectronics market is globally distributed now. So our adversaries are now able to buy a lot of the same technology the U.S. military is. If you go back to the Cold War, we were spending a lot more money on federal research and development. So you sort of assume that what DARPA had in the closet was 6, 7, 8 generations more advanced than what we would carry around in our pockets. And now the reverse is true. The iPhones that we carry around in our pockets are actually far more advanced in the processor in the F-35 because the consumer technology ecosystem has grown so much larger.
So basically, this is where you guys came in. Again, you built this like a VC fund or a company to basically bridge this gap between this fast-moving technology and maybe the slower-moving decision makers who still need to make these decisions that only they can make because they understand what's going on in the war. But did they recognize they have to move fast? Like, obviously, they did enough to fund your operation, but what happened then? So you started out, you're in Silicon Valley. Were you treated by other VCs as if you were a legit VC? Hey, we're Andreessen Horowitz. Come to the table with us and hang out, and we'll look at companies together.
Well, showing up in Silicon Valley and saying, hi, I'm from the government, I'm here to help, typically doesn't get you very far.
Although, like you said, there's one massive buyer there, and if you could get into that food chain, you're going to do very well.
Well, it's tricky though, because even though the Pentagon's budget is $800 billion a year, right, which is enormous, and its weapons spend, what it spends on technology and systems is like $280 billion or so. The consumer technology market is $25 trillion. It dwarfs, right, what the Pentagon spends. And not only that, but until we got there, if you wanted to do business with the Pentagon, you had to compete for contracts under what are called the Federal Acquisition Rules, or more specifically, the defense supplement of the Federal Acquisition Rules. And so if the Federal Acquisition Rules are like the Encyclopedia Britannica, the Defense Federal Acquisition Rule supplement is like the size of a dictionary. So you have to figure out how to master that. And the typical contract process for FAR-based contracts, they run typically 18 to 24 months. So if you're a startup that's backed by a venture capital firm and you tell your investor, I have a good lead on a government contract, but I'm not going to know if I get it for 2 years, they're going to tell you that doesn't sound great to me because I need to know that you're going to be profitable in about another year to a year and a half if I'm going to give you your next round of funding. So the two systems were simply incompatible. And for that reason, in 2016, when we arrived in Silicon Valley, venture investors simply told the people they funded, hey, don't even take a meeting with the government. It won't help you get your next round of funding. In fact, if you try to break into the government market as a young startup, we actually will withdraw our funding. We'll take it away because we don't think you can win. Wait until you go public and you're much bigger and you can hire lobbyists and specialists and grow a government business. Don't do it now as a startup.
And so what would you do? What worked for you?
Well, there were people that were back in Washington in the acquisition community, the people that run this massive system of how the Pentagon buys its technology, beginning to imagine how can we make it easier? How can we break into this other technology ecosystem? How can we reimagine a different world where we're not the prime mover and we have 5 or 6 defense primes who are custom. Whose whole mission is to meet our every need, right, and to cater to us. How can we enter a market where people are skeptical of us? How can we make a contract on commercial terms that doesn't require you to have an auditing system that's not commercial specific, that's bespoke for the Department of Defense? How can we waive all of the red tape that we ordinarily would impose on a public contract, and know that it's safe to do that because we're accessing technology where prices are generally set in a free market, where you don't have to have that system of cost accounting to ensure taxpayer dollars are being invested wisely. So, and this is an incredible story. It goes to show how one individual can really make a difference. But on our staff was a 29-year-old woman named Lauren Daly, who we met the first week in the office as we were getting to know the people that were at the unit. And she said, hey, there's a bunch of people in the acquisition community that have this kind of wild idea for how we could do things differently. And it all relates to a single clause that was inserted into this year's National Defense Authorization Act, the act of Congress that funds the department. And I think this could allow us to actually work with startups on terms they would be willing to do business with us on. And so my co-author Raj asked Lauren, well, it's great. Like, can you maybe write up a paper that describes how we could actually do this? And so she hands Raj a 20-page paper. So I've actually already written one. So we read it, and we realized that Lauren was really onto something. There was this powerful new authority that a renegade Senate staffer had literally snuck in the dark of night into this enormous law. And so a couple of days later, Lauren and I flew to Washington, and we met in quick succession with the head of acquisition policy in the Pentagon, the head acquisition lawyer in the Pentagon, and ultimately with the general counsel of the Department of Defense to make sure everybody saw what we saw in the new law and grew a consensus quickly that we should try out a much faster means of contracting. And so within 2 weeks, we codified a new policy that allowed us to let a contract between 30 to 60 days and to do so on commercial terms, which was remarkable. It had never really been done before in that way.
And so what did you do with it?
Well, we then went around to firms we knew had technology that could be useful in military missions. And useful right away. I mean, not something that you'd have to engineer to make work on the battlefield, but something that would be kind of turnkey. And we rapidly set out to begin technology pilots. And we did, I think, 10 or 12 of them in our first 100 days. And I'll be darned, but like a few of them worked really well.
Like what?
Well, of all things, we discovered a flying car company in Silicon Valley called Joby Aviation. Joby Aviation was at that time a stealth startup, so they were not advertising themselves. But of course, we knew people who knew them, and we got introduced. And they were developing an electronic-powered VTOL aircraft, so literally a flying air taxi that can take off and land vertically, but fly horizontally at a very high rate of speed. And we knew that this technology could be really interesting to the military, right? I mean, you don't need a runway to land it. Unlike a helicopter, it's actually quite quiet. Also, it's smaller, so rather than loading a lot of people on a helicopter, which can be very vulnerable, and we've had some very tragic incidents of losing large numbers of people, in helicopter shootdowns. You could disaggregate forces, and Joby, they were very well capitalized, so they actually weren't interested at first in working with the military, because they asked the smart question, like, what's in it for us? Like, we have plenty of money to keep developing our technology. But it turned out we had something they did need, which is that we had military test ranges. And it's much easier to get on a military test range than it is to get on a civilian test range, much less paperwork, much quicker.
I would think you had something else that they needed, which is actually legal viability in use cases. Like, it's unclear. Like, there's hundreds and hundreds of flying car companies out there, and if you go to the Google's patent site, there's gazillion patents on flying car technology. No city is ever gonna, at this point, years and years later, no city is even close to approving flying cars. Maybe San Francisco, but that would be about it. But the military can actually use these things.
Yeah, so that's true too. So we were able to convince them, hey, there's an orthogonal mission set. And by experimenting your technology on the mission set, you're going to get a lot of data, you're going to get user feedback, and you're going to be able to fly quickly on our test range. And so began a multi-month period of experimentation. DIU actually acquired the first Joby aircraft. Fast forward 8 years later, the Joby eVTOL aircraft is presently undergoing operational testing with the Air Force. It's about to become a part of the U.S. Air Force fleet, which is
And what will it do?
Well, it will perform a number of potential missions. One is transporting people. Another is transporting supplies. And because the vehicle can be both piloted but also has autonomous capabilities, you can just imagine how this would be useful to move and resupply troops or forward positions that are in areas of danger and risk, where you wouldn't want to ask a helicopter crew to go in if you didn't have to. So there's a world of possibility that the Air Force will have open to it as they begin to acquire Joby aircraft at scale.
It seems like also you've done a lot of stuff with drones. And like you mentioned with Ukraine, these kamikaze drones en masse are taking out the last generation of military innovation with the 100-year-old technology of tanks. So it seemed, and drones is something that's been fairly big in Silicon Valley over the past 10 years. What are some of the successes with drones?
So very early at DIU, we were aware of things that were happening on the battlefield in places like Syria, Afghanistan, and Iraq. And there were two things happening. One, ISIS and Taliban fighters were actually acquiring commercial drones, commercially, literally off Amazon, primarily through the company DJI, the Chinese drone maker that makes the most popular drones. And they were using them against U.S. forces. And they were using them to do things like disrupt special forces raids, because the drone would be able to spot our assault teams coming. They also, at times early in our existence, used them to drop grenades and actually kill U.S. troops. So that called the attention of battlefield commanders. Hey, our fairly unsophisticated adversaries that don't have, their own predator drones or their own helicopters or their own fighter aircrafts are nevertheless finding ways to defeat our very sophisticated technology using cheap consumer drones. And then the other thing that was happening was our forces had access to very sophisticated high-end drones, surveillance drones, and they had access to some tactical drones, but nothing as simple and easy to operate as a DJI drone. So some units were literally taking DJI drones with them into combat, some US units, and using them for reconnaissance, using them for surveillance. And that was a problem because DJI drones, being Chinese made, we couldn't be sure that they weren't recording where they were in the world and what they were looking at, and then uploading that information ultimately to Chinese servers. So, in response to these developments, Defense Innovation Unit, and this is something we disclosed for the first time in the book, started a special task force called Rogue Squadron. And Rogue Squadron was the military's first commercial drone unit. And it was started by two real renegades, Mark Jacobson, an Air Force, at that time Lieutenant Colonel, and Ryan Beale, a Navy helicopter pilot who was also a coder. And both of them were drone hobbyists. They loved drones. Like between the two of them, I think they owned over 50 different commercial drones that they just had been like playing with, kind of Mad Max style. And so they set up literally in the parking lot of Defense Innovation Unit a test range where they could fly the drones they had, prototype drones from startups in Silicon Valley, companies that were testing out counter drone technology, and they began to experiment. What could we do about adversaries that are using DJI drones? Are there ways to disrupt them? Are there ways to, if we capture one of them, exploit it and figure out where the operator launched it from? Can we take DJI drones that are being used by American forces because they're the only consumer drone on the market, that has so much capability? They have, 90% of the market share. And can we make them safe so that we can be sure that the locations where they're being used won't be disclosed, won't slip out to somebody else's computer servers? And in short order, they did all of these things. And that led to some really important programs that are still ongoing in the military today. One program to make commercial drones safe, to literally declare, okay, these drones are safe to be used by the U.S. military, by other government entities, because we can be sure there's not a counterintelligence risk. And then other efforts to create both offensive and defensive drone technology that today is being used in Ukraine.
Yeah, and then Palmer Luckey, the guy who started Oculus, which sold for $2 billion to Facebook, the virtual reality headset maker. He started a drone company.
Yeah, I mean, so Palmer Luckey, clearly one of the most incredible technologists of our generation, came to visit my co-author Raj at Defense Innovation Unit, along with another venture capitalist, Trey Stevens, somebody that had a lot of national security experience, had himself worked in the intelligence community, and then worked for Palantir before going to Founders Fund, one of the more prominent venture capitalists here in venture capital firms here in Silicon Valley. And they were trying to imagine, hey, if we could create a new company focused on this whole new generation of advanced defense technology, how should we do it? What are the most important problems that software and hardware designed by leading product engineers could solve? So they came by to have a chat with Raj to kind of brainstorm together. And that brainstorm, before they even sort of decided to formally build a company and ultimately name it Anduril, gave birth to today what is one of the most important new companies in the world in terms of the technology it's producing. And fast forward just a few short years, Anduril, in something that really was a surprise, an astonishing development, won a major contract from the U.S. Air Force, probably the most important contract the U.S. Air Force has led in the last 20 years, to develop something called combat collaborative aircraft. So these are supersonic stealth drones that will fly alongside F-35s and other manned aircraft and give the Air Force whole new capabilities. Swarming a fleet of swarming supersonic stealthy drones that can both perform reconnaissance missions, but also can perform strike missions. And the two final performers, as that contract competition went forward, were both non-traditional. One was General Atomics, not necessarily known for building aircraft, and then the other was Anduril. And this is a huge success. This shows that what Defense Innovation Unit set out to do is actually happening. In that we now have venture capitalists that are viewing the military as a viable customer, as a customer that's not going to just make its startups go bankrupt if they try and compete for contracts. And that in turn has led a whole new generation of founders to say, I actually want to focus on building the next generation of military technology. And so you have not only Anduril, but other companies like Shield AI, like Joby, like Saildrone, that are becoming unicorns, whose valuations are now north of $1 billion, joining the first, league of defense startups, SpaceX and Palantir, in this whole new generation of companies that are now selling really advanced technology developed in modern ways by leading Silicon Valley engineers to the military.
Well, and you mentioned Palantir. Wasn't Palantir initially funded by In-Q-Tel, which was kind of the CIA equivalent of what you were doing with DIU? So there was kind of this something already happening, but it was more on the CIA side in terms of funding startups.
Yeah, In-Q-Tel is a really amazing and interesting institution. It is actually a venture fund, unlike Defense Innovation Unit, which simply invests in R&D pilots. So it doesn't actually, buy a stake in a company. It just buys their product to try out. In-Q-Tel was created in the wake of 9/11 by some visionary people who realized, as our boss, Secretary of Ash Carter, did, that the US government's monopoly on advanced technology was starting to dissipate, that the rise of companies like Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, each of whom had, Google, each of whom had a market capitalization larger than the entire defense industry combined, meant that the locus of innovation was shifting out to the commercial sector. And so, unless the intelligence community was also able to access that technology ecosystem, the sort of James Bond Q shop of special toys, would eventually be outpaced by what you could buy in the consumer market. And so, In-Q-Tel has been out in the valley for a long time and invests fairly small amounts of money as a way of observing what technology could be used by the intelligence community, and then making introductions between those companies and potential customers within the IC. And so that model was important for us to replicate in many ways and build on, but for the Department of Defense, which is a very different creature than the intelligence community and has a different mission set and as well as a different scale to it.
And where did you guys intersect with AI? Like, how did you start bringing AI? I know AI was a big focus for you. So how did you start bringing AI into up to speed for the military?
Well, when we arrived in Silicon Valley in 2016, that was a year where, in particular, machine learning was really coming of age. And so, machine learning was beginning to be, as accurate as a human in spotting certain things. So that's really incredible, right? There's, a machine almost as good, or even in small use cases, better than human eyeballs at processing data or information. So right away we realized, well, here we are still sort of fighting the wars in the aftermath of 9/11 in Iraq and Afghanistan, and facing insurgents that are implanting, IEDs, which can still, be destructive even to our most advanced armor. So we built this massive surveillance system to surveil the battlefield and to try and track insurgents, spot them planting IEDs. And so there's one device in particular called Gorgon Stare, which is a drone, or you can actually put it on a balloon as well, an aerostat, and it will essentially use hundreds of cameras to look at an area the size of Disney World and take multiple snapshots a second of what's going on, both video and photography. So this is a massive amount of data to process. Way more data than any team of human analysts could day in, day out keep track of. So we, along with some others in the Pentagon, began an initiative called Project Maven, which was an experiment to see could machines and machine learning algorithms begin to process this data in ways that could flag places where human analysts might want to go back and look. So can we tell the difference between a tank and an ambulance? Can we identify markers that you would want to go back and have an actual human intelligence look at from this, these gigabytes and terabytes of imagery that's coming off multiple platforms, and that led to a real breakthrough, which showed that yes, you actually can use machine learning much more efficiently than the limited number of intelligence analysts you have, and it ultimately led to the creation of something called the Joint AI Center in the Pentagon, which was an attempt to centralize a group of experts, technologists, and military strategists to seed AI across the military and to take it into many more different mission sets.
And what other successes have come out of that? Like, what other technologies are we using now?
Well, on artificial intelligence, I mean, everything from using it to predict aircraft maintenance. So, every modern aircraft has got a lot of parts in it. They all break at different rates. You can replace them on a set schedule, but you're still going to get surprised based on the conditions you're deploying the aircraft in. So, if you can just figure out a few parts that are likely to break, the next flight cycle and go ahead and replace them now, rather than have an aircraft have to return to base and not be able to complete a mission, that's a huge gain in operational performance. And so one of AI's other early successes in the department was helping increase the number of flyable hours that aircraft and unmanned platforms were able to achieve. AI is now more recently being used in even more advanced mission sets. So one of the most successful Defense Innovation Unit programs to date that happened long after Raj and I left the unit happened with the Navy's underwater mine detection mission. So, mines, which are military technology that actually date to ancient China, I think, like literally to the Ming Dynasty, or hundreds of years, maybe not that far back, but hundreds of years ago. Mines were also used in the American Revolutionary War and the Civil War, and they're still around today. And it turns out, particularly in some of the most likely potential conflict scenarios, including Taiwan, mining could be very decisive. So the Navy works hard at being good at having autonomous vehicles that can, as well as ships, that can go out and detect where mines have been planted and then defuse them before they collide with a Navy ship or a submarine. And artificial intelligence underwater proves to be really important to increasing the efficiency of an underwater vehicle to be able to notice, hey, what's that anomaly over there? Maybe I should go take a look at it now and have an algorithm that will redirect, this underwater vehicle in that direction, rather than have to wait for data collectors to pull the tape from the vehicle, process it, and say, "Oh shoot, I wish we would have." Now we have to mount another underwater vehicle to go take a second look. So little upgrades like that have, in cases, doubled or quadrupled the mission effectiveness of some of these underwater vehicles, which is a very important development for the U.S. Navy.
Are there any technologies that have kind of ethical issues in commercial use that you wouldn't have in like military use? So for instance, facial recognition. So obviously facial recognition in the consumer space, it was kind of floated out there and then quickly slapped down. Oh, we think we might see you in a photo. I would get these messages on Facebook, but then that technology sort of went away from commercial use for good reason. But obviously with military use, it could be important. Like, oh, we have this satellite footage of this marketplace in Afghanistan. Turns out there's one of the big military leaders is there because we recognize them from the satellite using our facial recognition technology. Is there any initiatives like that, or do you get slowed down by the commercial ethical issues?
Well, I mean, it's always important with technology, whether it's in a consumer context or a governmental context or a law enforcement context or a military context, to be very attuned to ethical issues. And as we experienced with Project Maven, where there was a large protest by some Google employees who were caught off guard by the fact that their company was engaged in this technology pilot, and also had a misunderstanding based on a fairly sensational headline. This is a story about how one headline can really impact a large number of people into thinking about something the wrong way. The headline implied that Google was working on an offensive drone warfare project rather than a defensive surveillance analysis project. But in any event, technologists that are producing this technology have, of course, a special responsibility to being attuned to its use cases and to speak up when they see potential harms, because they may well see those harms before others, as do, of course, you and I as citizens. So yes, certainly there are examples like face recognition technology that, you or I would not want to be deployed, by our local mall security, right? Or potentially by police forces in our city. But that you would imagine, we would both feel comfortable deploying on the battlefield. But there's actually, it cuts another way as well, which is that, if you and I are using a commercial laptop and it crashes and has to restart, it's no big deal, right? I mean, maybe this podcast gets interrupted. Maybe you get cut out of a Zoom meeting for a few minutes, but if that's the computer running an airplane that you're flying in, it crashing and restarting could be a real problem. So, there is a phrase that's fair that says beta testing can kill people. And that speaks to part of the skepticism that is fair from people in the military that say, for so long, consumer technology, sure, I mean, it was fun. Like, my kids have iPhones, but do we actually know it's going to perform on the battlefield in different conditions, in high temperatures, under extremes, under high G loads? So there has to be a way also to make sure that commercial technology that may work well in everyday life will also work well on the battlefield.
Yeah. So with facial recognition, is this something that is starting to be considered for military use, or these types of technologies?
Well, there is a quite a history to this, and this goes back to actually the Iraq War, where during an incredible insurgency, the U.S. military was doing its best to try and secure the Iraqi population and make them safe by figuring out who the small number of insurgents were, and trying to take them off the battlefield. And it's It's really interesting. I got a chance to serve as a civilian in Iraq in parts of 2006 and 2007, so the most violent years of the war. And, just one or two people out of 100, it turns out, can really cause a breakdown, in sovereignty, can um, take a village or a town from a place of relative peace to one of extreme violence where everyone's stuck inside their homes. And so even then there was a question of uh, you know biometric identification. How do we know when we capture somebody um, in a house we just raided who they actually are? And have we captured them before and released them because we thought they weren't actually part of an insurgent cell, but then we find them again with explosive residue on their hand? So yeah, indeed, these are the kinds of technologies that matter because on the battlefield they help you separate combatant from civilian. And so you would want, a military, particularly one that abides by the laws of war and does its best to minimize uh, harms to civilians, to be equipped with technology that's very good at identifying people.
And is the technology getting there? Is the technology good now?
This is not. This is a little bit outside my domain, but this has indeed been a huge focus of the intelligence community and the U.S. military. And I have to imagine that the technology today is a lot better than it was a generation ago.
I mean, given what you know and your experiences with the DIU and again bridging this gap between Silicon Valley and the military and all the things you discussed in your book, if you were to start a company today to bridge this gap, what would you focus on?
Well, we're in this interesting moment, right? Where, again, the civilian technology economy, the consumer market has grown so much larger than the military one. So I would start a company that would take areas where the consumer technology market is clearly in the lead and apply that to technologies that would help us make us more safe and secure. So, um, artificial intelligence is a sort of become a canonical example, right? I mean, this is arguably the first major technology that, yeah, sure, there was some government R&D much earlier, but the generative AI wave that we're now living through, which is extraordinary. I mean, it's like a Thomas and Edison light bulb moment. That was produced entirely by the private sector, by three companies, four companies, three of whom are within 10 miles of where I am right now. And so I would want to position myself to take those leading edge technologies and then imagine the ways they can be used differently than our the existing technologies we use to keep ourselves safe and secure.
Like what specific? Like, okay, if I were to throw something out, I would want to create something that could scan all emails sent to anybody to see what might be to flag what might be suspicious. Terrorists talking to each other about plans to attack something. And again, ethical qualms aside, like that would seem to be a useful thing in the military and possible, like in the sense that there's probably plenty of examples of suspicious emails over the decades that you could analyze and learn from to create an AI language model that could at least help flag potential dangerous emails.
That's, I mean, certainly an intelligence community mission. Uh, the things that I think about as somebody, as a national security strategist, um, that are certainly top of mind, are, how do we make sure we don't get into a great power war? A war between truly advanced militaries, right? I mean, we haven't had a great power war for 3 generations now since the Second World War. And what happened there was horrific. It was on a scale unlike any of the other conflicts that we're seeing today. So, and that, one certain worry that I think more people are talking about now is the United States and China. As our relationship, which is one still today of incredible economic interdependence, is running into more tensions. Tensions about Taiwan, tensions about China's behavior to its neighbors, tensions about China's economic coercion of other nations. So as we try and think about um, uh, rising global tensions between two superpowers that are both very advanced, how can we keep the peace? And of course, one of the ways of keeping the peace is to field military systems that alter the calculus of your adversary, that make them think it's just not worth it to try and go to war. That even though for our own reasons, we might want to, um, you know, uh, uh, make Taiwan, our long lost province, come back to the homeland. Um, maybe we need to shift the calculus so that the costs of doing that are simply too high. So those are some of the military problems that I think about when I um, try and imagine how new technology could actually make a real difference.
How would you make the cost of invading Taiwan too high, other than with nuclear, the threat of nuclear weapons?
Well, you know, so Taiwan's an island, right? I mean, you have to get there, right? You have to cross a sea. Um, and so I think that's where a fight over Taiwan would take place. And so you have to imagine under incredibly pressurized circumstances, far more so than today on the battle lines of Ukraine. With massive electronic warfare capabilities on both sides, how in a very contested environment would you be able to stop an invasion? So, a technology that's autonomous, that can fight through jamming, that can operate in areas where it's not going to be able to connect with global positioning systems, where it's going to have to figure out where it is on its own. Those are the kinds of systems I think that will be most important to deterring conflict in Taiwan.
So, it seems like it's going to be very hard ultimately as technology improves. Like, let's say drones could be the size of mosquitoes, and let's say they're all equipped with GPS and facial recognition software and explosives. So you could imagine China sending in a a, a million of these mosquito drones into Taiwan. Oh, I recognize this person. He's the leader of Taiwan. Here's the generals of Taiwan. And in 1 hour, go at supersonic speeds from China over to Taiwan, high enough that it can't be affected by any ships that might be protecting Taiwan, and just take everyone out that they need to very quickly. And there's almost nothing we could do about something like that as the technology improves.
Well, this brings to mind an older literature in political science that is newly relevant on something called strategic stability, and one of the counterintuitive outcomes of the proliferation of nuclear weapons. So, nuclear weapons developed, as we've all seen in the movie Oppenheimer, here by the United States in Los Alamos, but quickly stolen by the Soviets. From there, nuclear technology proliferates in the next couple decades to a small number of other nations around the world. So, the question is, did nuclear weapons make the world a more dangerous place? I mean, these are horrifically destructive weapons. Or did they actually make the world a safer place because they reduced the likelihood that nations that had nuclear weapons would actually go to war with one another, because, a nuclear exchange is no good for anybody. And indeed, in certain ways, the advent of nuclear proliferation has reduced great power conflict demonstrably. Now, there are limits to this. Would you want everybody in the world to have their own personal nuclear weapon? You certainly wouldn't. And so, one of the open questions that we should all be alert to as citizens is some of this new autonomous technology driven by AI going to increase strategic stability? Is it going to make make war less likely because um, of the high costs involved were war to break out? Or is it going to, in different ways, destabilize the international system, where one nation gains a sudden advantage that changes the calculus it has about whether it will go to war against another in a particular circumstances. So these are all things that are now being very very actively studied and debated, not only by national security strategists, by a lot of other Americans who are, have seen all the Hollywood movies, right, about the Terminator, and should be very focused on how technology is changing our world.
Yeah, I guess even in like cybersecurity, like you look what happened a few weeks ago with CrowdStrike. Now we think that wasn't some sort of hack by a foreign, actor, but it could have been, and we see how quickly it took down almost the whole infrastructure of, you know, many industries across the world. And we could see as cybersecurity gets even more sophisticated, particularly when combined with AI, that could easily happen again and again and again. And I worry we're heading into some kind of black hole where the technology gets so good of offense and there is no defense, and we're just in nonstop trouble.
Well, this brings to the fore another concept that comes out of the Cold War and strategic stability and military history and strategy more generally, which is the offensive-defense balance and how will technology change it. And again, anytime you experience a major shift, something that gives the offense dominance, then you may end up in a situation where countries, if they have a reason to go to war, will judge that, well, maybe we actually have a shot at achieving our objectives at a cost that is acceptable to us. And so, you can imagine a nightmare scenario, right, where AI gets very good at hacking or creating cyber disruptions. But it's equally true that AI, as DARPA has demonstrated in some very advanced experiments, including their cyber challenge, that AI can also be used to autonomously patch systems and much more quickly detect vulnerabilities in code than human cybersecurity professionals. So, again, it's an open question. Will really powerful AI models in the end be a threat to cybersecurity, or will they enhance it?
What do you think?
Well, I think the jury is out, but if I were an advanced country that requires a lot of microprocessors to make my daily life work, I mean, my toaster downstairs has got a microprocessor in it, right? I would want to make a lot of investments right now in AI tools that will enhance cyber defense because it's my interest to make sure my very vulnerable and tightly coupled infrastructure will stay safe. So all these things should hopefully be guiding the investments we make as a nation, as a society. And we better get them right, because if we get them wrong, we're going to be exposing ourselves and our way of life to risk.
Well, from your mouth to God's ears, or at least the government's ears, as they start purchasing more and more of these technologies, and you did a great thing by starting this DIU to bridge this gap between the technology of Silicon Valley and the needs of the military. And you and Raj Shah, your partner in this, write about it in the book Unit X, how the Pentagon and Silicon Valley are transforming the future of war. So really great stuff. We only touched the surface of it. There's so many technologies that we were being left in the dust on, and now we've been catching up. And you describe a lot of this, and it's also a good textbook on how to deal with bureaucracy. It was really fascinating how you worked around some of the issues and some of the problems that you almost found yourself in. So very riveting story. Unit X. Thank you so much. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me on.